Welcome to our second lecture on Southeast Asia. We're going to talk a lot about population as well as some cultural aspects in this lecture today. So let's take a look at population. Over 600 million people in this region. And along with China, or East Asia, Southeast Asia is the third largest concentration or population cluster in the world. And in the mainland, we see a lot more clusters on the river valleys and the deltas. That's obviously related to agricultural soils. And the island, they have clusters around the volcanic soils that we've talked about, as well as the coastlines. And I put up that one thing I mentioned in our last class. I was a little bit off. I said 155 million, but it's 150 million people on the island of Java with 50 active volcanoes. You can see it here in the red. So one of the most densely populated and the most populated island in the world. So Java is just one part of Indonesia. So if we take a look at Indonesia as a whole, it's one of the top 5 countries in the world in terms of population. Over 277 million people in Indonesia. And later we'll talk about it, but it's also the most populous Muslim country in the world because of its large population. And its growth rate is about 0.8%, which is relatively low. It's not high by any means. So we can't consider anything under 1% low growth. And you can see that they have made changes and is starting to flatten out. So just as we see around the world, the population growth, while still going on, it's slowing down. Here's Vietnam. They have 104 million people and about 1% growth rate. So again, that's low to moderate growth rate. And on this population pyramid, you can see going all the way up from they had a pyramid shape, but then looks like 40 years ago, 30 years ago, we suddenly saw a shift. And then it went into a little bit lower and it's flattening out and it's going to get to 0 pretty soon. Singapore is an interesting one from demographics. If you look at that population pyramid, that has done a huge reversal in the last 30 years and going into basically would be negative growth, about 6 million people, and their total fertility rate is 1.2. And if you remember, the replacement level is 2.1. So they're below replacement level. This is getting close to some of the lowest fertility rates in the world. And they're attempting to have people try to have more children. The government promotes it. They give out like love potions. They send out Valentine's cards. They're doing all these things to try to get people to have more kids, but nobody wants to. Now, their population is growing at a relatively slow rate, but that's all due to migration. And especially people from China and other places moving into Singapore, since it's a wealthy place, there's a lot of opportunities there. But the people in Singapore are not having many kids. In Cambodia, I put up I'm not going to show every population pyramid for every country, just kind of a few examples. Cambodia is a little bit higher in their population growth rate, but what is really interesting about this pyramid is it kind of gets really uneven. So you can see it growing like a pyramid, but then around 45 to 50 years ago, we suddenly see this indentation. And that was during the 4 to 5 years of the Civil War in the 1970s. When the Khmer Rouge came into power and went back to had the killing fields. We'll talk about that later on. So you saw a huge indent. Millions of people died during that realm. And then it continued, then it grew afterwards. And then now you see it starting to kind of waver and it's starting to slow down. If it still looked like a pyramid, it would be growing fast, but something has changed and it's really slowing. And then for Thailand, Thailand has 70 million people and only a 0.2% growth rate. Their fertility rate, I think, is like 1.2 as well. So they're not having as many kids as they used to. And that 0.2% is really, really low. And I think it's probably due to actually some migration coming into the country. Now, to understand this, we're going to watch a video. I do apologize that it's not the best quality, because it's an online one that's been recorded. I do have the DVD and it's a much better quality. But we're going to watch it anyway, and yeah, enjoy.
Welcome to the future. PBS Digital.
But some of the goods of global health are less tangible than medicines or vaccines. One of the great challenges is to deliver information and to persuade people to change their behavior. Consider the case of HIV. 2 decades ago, scientists determined how the virus is transmitted and how to avoid infection. Yet HIV has engulfed one country after another. The nation of Thailand once seemed doomed. Its sex industry had exploded during the Vietnam War, when thousands of American servicemen were stationed here. Later, it continued to attract foreign sex tourists, as well as scores of Thai customers. Ideal conditions for spreading HIV throughout the country. But Thailand has a special deterrent against the virus.
Come, follow me.
His name is Michai Viravaidya. He's been waging war against HIV for 2 decades. He wields an unconventional weapon, the condom.
She says she uses the condom every time.
Sometimes the right person comes along at the critical time, and Michai Viravaidya for Thailand really was that right person. He is, you could call him a force of nature.
Have some more. International size. She's 19, and I said that if you use condom, you live to be 70.
I agree with what you're doing.
Good. You're never too old.
I am.
Michai has this amazing sense of humor. He gets everybody laughing.
And that goes with the Big Mac.
If anyone was born to battle HIV, it was Michai. His mother was Scottish, his father Thai. They met in medical school in Edinburgh and raised their family in Thailand. At the age of 13, Michai was sent to school in Australia, where he excelled at sports. He returned to Thailand with a degree in commerce and took a job with the government's planning authority. He traveled throughout his homeland. It was a revelation.
I've never seen so many children in my life in any single gathering. Of course, in Australia, you'll see more kangaroos than people, but here I'd never seen such large gatherings of children in large groups. As it turned out, it was about 7 kids per family.
Michai was convinced that Thailand would never prosper unless it curbed its population growth. So he quit his job and founded a non-profit organization. He took family planning beyond the government's health clinics. He recruited average citizens to distribute contraceptives to friends and neighbors. Everyone was encouraged to spread the word about family planning. Then, Michai came up with his unmistakable trademark.
I was trying to demonstrate the pills and IUDs and sterilization, and there wasn't even one smile in the audience. So when I pulled out the condom, and there was some giggles, and I opened up the condom, and there was laughter, I said, I'm onto something.
And we have many, many uses of the condom. You can, of course, put coins and change into here, or Coca-Cola if you like. And, of course, you can use it as a balloon for young children.
When family planning was first talked about in Thailand in the late 60s and early 1970s, people said, no, you can't deal with that here because it's a very conservative society. People are embarrassed. They don't talk about it. And Michai showed that you can talk about anything if you do it with a sense of humor and with gusto.
Michai was unstoppable. He distributed family planning T-shirts and key rings. He obtained the blessings of the Buddhist clergy. He staged condom-blowing contests and vasectomy festivals.
It's fun, it's lighthearted, and it's safe. And today we hope to do 1,000 just in one day and create a world record.
Michai became known as the Condom King, and condoms became known as Michais. Most importantly, he produced results. Within a decade, the country's birth rate dropped by more than half in one of the most successful family planning programs on record. By the mid-1980s, Thailand's economy was booming. Michai was recognized as a champion of social causes. He might have rested on his laurels. Then, in 1984, the first case of AIDS in Thailand was reported.
When AIDS was known to me, I knew very well that this could be a match in dry grass, and Thailand would burn if we didn't do anything about it, because there was commercial sex, and this could spread very, very rapidly.
Michai voiced his alarm to members of government, to no avail. Thailand's tourist industry was flourishing, and no one wanted to rock that boat.
Thailand was in denial in the early days from 1980 to 1990. Governments are always followers rather than leaders, and until they see a catastrophe, they don't think it's going to happen.
But in 1991, a new prime minister took office and took HIV seriously. He made Michai his AIDS czar. The battle was on. The sex trade was illegal, but to shut it down would have forced it underground. So Michai dispatched free condoms to the trade and ordered routine testing of workers for sexually transmitted diseases.
And if a girl of a particular establishment became infected, then there was a warning to the establishment owner. Second time was a written warning. Third time was closure for 1 week, and then 1 month.
Soon, the rate of condom use in brothels rose from 10 to 90%. Then, Michai hit the airwaves.
โรคอันตรายที่มีอัตราการแพร่กระจายสูงจนน่าตกใจถ้าเราไม่ช่วยกันหยุดมันวันนี้อีก10 ปีข้างหน้าก็ไม่แน่ว่าจะมีคนไทยเหลืออยู่กี่คน
We used 488 radio stations and 6 TV stations owned by government, and we said it's compulsory from now on. Every hour broadcast, half a minute of AIDS education. It was total saturation. Banks, insurance companies, movie stars, they all came out, helped to support. Gas stations gave out condoms, and policemen gave out condoms, and people in uniform, out of uniforms, gave out AIDS information. So everybody joined in. It was a massive effort, and people realized that this is real.
A decade after Michai became Thailand's AIDS czar, the nation's rate of new infections had decreased by almost 90%.
It was brilliant, and it worked. And they took an epidemic that threatened to be massive and brought it down to totally controlled levels.
But HIV has not been eradicated from Thailand. More than 500,000 people remain infected. Now Michai has turned his attention to them.
วันนี้อยากจะให้พบเพื่อนของผมมีหลายคนแล้วก็จะมาคุยให้เราฟังเล็กๆน้อยๆเรื่องผู้ติดเชื้อคุณนิสรากับสหายเพื่อนฝูงเชิญมา Stigma is very, very strong in every developing country at the start, and it really depends on how much public education is done. เห็นไหมว่าไม่มีทางติดได้ขนาดเกาะกางเกงยังไม่ติดเลยจิบมาอย่ากินให้หมดนะนิดเดียวเราจิบที่เดียว We believe we should introduce HIV positive people to communities to see that they're just like us แล้วผมก็ทานจากจุดเดียวกันติดไหมไม่มีทางติดจำไว้
Today, Nisara Panya will dispel some myths about HIV for 500 high school students.
My name is Nisara. I've been infected since 1999, but you can't tell I'm positive just by looking at me.
She hails from the northeast, the poorest region in Thailand. Her husband, like so many others, left home to find work. But he returned from a stint in Malaysia, weakened and ill. Within months, he died of AIDS. Nisra went for testing with her 2 children and discovered that she alone was infected.
When I first found out, I wanted to kill myself. I was afraid my village wouldn't accept me. I thought about it long and hard, but when I looked at my 2 children, I knew I had to fight for my life.
Because of the stigma attached to HIV, many infected Thais forego medical attention rather than reveal their status. Not Nisra. She went for treatment and began a regimen of antiretroviral drugs provided free of charge by the Thai government. Then she learned that Michai's nonprofit organization has started a loan program for people like her.
I saw people who were HIV positive had already lost their jobs, had used up all their savings, and there was a total sense of hopelessness. Now, surely we must be able to do something. And that was when I thought, maybe we should have a positive partnership whereby a positive person and a negative person become partners and do business together.
For Nisra and her sister, a small loan jump-started a photo framing venture.
At first, I was afraid I wouldn't be able to repay the loan. But business has been good. It's like getting a second chance at life.
Nisra began to speak out about the plight of people with HIV. Now she helps Michai turn fear into acceptance.
She was waiting there to die, her husband had died. She was giving up, but then she didn't give up. She's changed herself, and she's helping to influence other people. She is magnificent.
The day I found out I was infected, I told my children. They said, "It's okay, Mom. No matter what, we still love you." I want everyone who's infected, wherever you are, to be strong and fight this disease, just like me.
Nisra's resolve may be what Thailand needs most. In recent years, government funding for HIV education has dwindled. Infections are rising among young people, many of whom never heard of a man called Michai. And so, he keeps up the good fight.
Thailand has spent a lot of effort and a lot of money to bring down the spread of HIV. This is not a health problem, it's a societal problem. Everyone needs to be involved, the business sector, religious sector, education sector, government. It's total war, the only way to do it. We can make the next generation almost AIDS-free.
Thailand provides a powerful prescription for the delivery of public health. Strong leadership, combined with long-term political commitment, has worked wonders here.
All right. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that one. I thought it was really moving, a moving one. And the things I really like is, one, it was started out with family planning and a very simple solution in terms of using contraceptives. And they were successful. And today, like, they went from having 6 to 7, the fertility rate was 6 to 7 kids back in the 1960s and 70s, till today, now it's around like 1.2, 1.3. And their population growth is really, really slowed. And actually almost into negative territory. And whether or not that's a good or bad thing, that's something up for debate that we discussed in one of our first classes. Now, the second thing is that also the rise of HIV/AIDS, and especially in Thailand, where you do have that commercial sex industry and lots of tourism that goes on. And so he was also then able to use that same thing for family planning for health. I thought that was pretty amazing. And then the final thing that really moves me was that he didn't ignore the people that already had HIV/AIDS. So he actually started a foundation and they raise money and he gives out small loans, as you mentioned in the video, to someone that's HIV positive and someone that's negative, and they get to join together and form their own business or whatever it is that they want to do. Now I'm going to share my screen again and come back because there's a little bit more related to this. So while we were in Thailand, we stopped at a rest area, the students and all of us, and it was Cabbages and Condoms Resort and Restaurant. And there's several of these all across Thailand. They actually have places people can stay and they have restaurants and all of these things. And this was put on Michai by Michai. It's part of his foundation, and all the money that they earned in this Cabbages and Condoms entrepreneurship, whatever you want to call it, enterprise, goes to funding that rural population and development NGO that Michai set up. But it was kind of like, you know, okay, I'm just stopping in here. What's this about? Cabbages and condoms. Interesting combination. Here's another one of the signs at the restaurant. And then this one was during the election. I'm not going to say which election it was, but here in the United States. And since a lot of American tourists visit these, you know, are in this area. And you can see at the bottom, Republican size and Democratic size. So just something that's kind of cheeky and fun. I actually had the meat chai salad when I was there. Okay, so we're going to move from that topic to talking about things about migration. And there's a lot of movement of people in this region. And this is internal migration within the countries. And Indonesia is one of those that's really noted for this. We mentioned that Java has that huge population per square mile, very dense, 150 some million people. And it's also the center of their capital is there. It's kind of the center of their culture. It's about 56% of Indonesia's population is on the island of Java. So historically, they did a government-sponsored and unassisted, but also government-sponsored migration from Java to the other islands. And the thing to think about with Indonesia is that's thousands of islands, lots of different ethnic groups. You have different religions, and it's very difficult to keep a country like that, a fragmented country, if we will, together because it's so spread out. So part of it was a government initiative to try to spread the people from Java and their cultural and political influence to these other places to try to maintain a much more coherent Indonesia based on people from Java. But again, that's run into resistance in some places, and there are separatist groups and others that are fighting against the government based on, again, religious and ethnic divisions. But there has been a widespread movement of people from Java to those other islands. We also have refugees. We think about Vietnam and the refugees that left Vietnam after the Vietnamese War. East Timor also had an issue with that down here. When they became independent, they broke away from Indonesia in a very bloody way. Indonesia basically raised the country, but it was a former Portuguese one, whereas Indonesia was a Dutch colony in the past. But East Timor became its own independent country, but you did have a lot of refugees during the conflicts. And then I just mentioned the transmigration, Indonesia resettlement. And then here's kind of showing a little bit more about things like I mentioned, refugees, especially from Vietnam, Cambodia during their conflicts. Today, there are refugees coming from Myanmar. Certain Muslim groups are being oppressed by the Buddhist government and the military who have taken control of Myanmar. And so some of them are getting on boats and trying to find places that they can go. And so they try to get to Indonesia. Sometimes they end up in Thailand or Bangladesh, but we have that as well. Guest workers. So a lot of people that go to, we mentioned, I don't think we actually did mention it in this class too much yet, but in the Persian Gulf, where the oil industry is really important, they import a lot of their labor. And since most of those are Muslim countries, they turn to places like Indonesia, where the majority of people are Muslims. And so they're encouraged to migrate to the Persian Gulf, to Dubai, you know, Oman, all of these, Qatar, Kuwait, to actually work, whether it's in the construction, oil, or domestic services. The Philippines is also another place that sends a lot of workers, especially in the shipping industry, whether it's cruise ships or cargo ships. And the people from the Philippines are well known as working in those areas. And then I have this, what this map is actually really about is the overseas Chinese. That means that people, and historically, the Chinese populations have been throughout Southeast Asia. So the city of Bangkok, for example, in Thailand, that place is actually originally a Chinese fishing village, and it became the capital over time. And so there's large populations of people of Chinese descent that live now in parts of Southeast Asia and have communities there, especially places like Singapore. You can see in the bottom left. Out of the 6 million people there, 2 million are actually of Chinese descent. Then we can think about languages. I'm going to start with the Austronesian languages. This is in Indonesia, the Philippines, and a few other small locales. This is the one that originated in this area, but then it diffused to other parts of the world. So, for example, in Polynesia, the language that you speak in Fiji or Hawaii even, those are related to Southeast Asia, to the Austronesian language family. So as the Polynesians made their way across the Pacific, they brought their languages, and then they changed, of course, as they migrated to other places and were isolated. One group also left this area, but instead of sailing to the east, they sailed to the west across the Indian Ocean, and they ended up in Madagascar. So the language that's spoken in Madagascar is actually related to those from the insular parts of Southeast Asia. Tibeto-Burman is a smaller one that's in Myanmar for the most part, a little bit into Thailand, and that's related to Tibet and possibly related to the spread of religion as well. Thai Kadai is what you see in Thailand and parts of Laos. The Mon Khmer, that's what you see in Cambodia, the Khmer, as well as in Vietnam. So there are different language families, all three of these along the mainland there. And Papuan is out in Papua New Guinea and Papua, Indonesia, and that's indigenous language, the original one of different tribal groups. So there's a lot of linguistic diversity. And even within places like Indonesia, you have a lot of different types of languages that are spoken. Now for religion, and we're going to do a lot of focus on Buddhism in this class, since it's kind of a prominent thing in the mainland of Southeast Asia. So in the mainland, in these orange colors, we have more animistic religions. And these come from the hill tribes and groups that have come down from China as well as India. And there's mostly more remote areas, and that's why they call them the hill tribes. So they focus on more of their traditional religions. And then we have a lot of Buddhism in two different types in this area, which we'll go into more detail. Mahayana in Vietnam and Theravada in Cambodia, Thailand, Myanmar. Now, Malaysia, Brunei, and Indonesia are predominantly Islamic. The island of Bali, which is very famous, I think some of you guys are surfers and like to go to Bali or something like that, or Lombok, that actually is Hindu. And the interesting thing is that in this whole region, they had animistic religions, and then the first kind of ones that came through was actually Hinduism. So much of this area was Hindu. Then Buddhism came in, and then Islam came later. And so a lot of these places are a mix of it, and Bali is one of those remnants of the Hindu tradition. We also, of course, in the Philippines, a mix of both animistic, a little bit of Islam in the southern parts of the Philippines, and then the rest is mostly Roman Catholic, based on the long history that they had with the Spanish Empire. And then in Borneo and Papua, we have a lot more animistic tribal religions, the kind of the original ones that were there with tribal groups. So again, you have kind of a complex mix. So we're going to spend just a little bit of time on Buddhism. And the reason for this is that this is kind of the region of the world where we can talk about it in more detail. So for each region, I like to kind of highlight and focus on something that's, of that era, that place, if you will. Sorry about that. So Buddhism, and when I was in Thailand with our students, we actually had some Buddhist priests and Buddhist scholars come and talk to our class. So a lot of what I'm going to present here comes from those lectures. It's not perfect, of course. It's a very complex religion. So let's start out with Buddhism. Buddhism has about 500 million followers. It's very difficult to tell. We'll talk about that in a moment because it's a very syncretic and inclusionary type of religion. And we'll talk later, it originated about 530 BC in what is the border of modern day India and Nepal. On the top right is the Golden Buddha in Bangkok, Thailand. And at the bottom, that's the Dalai Lama, who's the most famous figure of Buddhism. And it's really highlighted in China and Southeast Asia, but we also see it in places like Sri Lanka and South Asia and other parts of the world. And what's interesting is that it's a non-exclusive religion. So if you think about Christianity or Islam, it's you follow one or the other. You follow yours, you can't blend them together. Buddhism doesn't really care about that. As long as you follow the basic Buddhist principles, you could be a Christian and a Buddhist or a Muslim and a Buddhist. They can blend it together, which makes the number of followers difficult to really ascertain. So it began, you see this purple dot in the middle, that's on the border of India and China, and then it migrated or diffused into Central Asia, so the Tibetan areas, and to Mongolia. We also have down to like a place like Sri Lanka, which is an important center. Also down into Southeast Asia, the mainland areas. And then, of course, across China, into the Korean Peninsula, and into Japan. And those are kind of the main areas of Buddhism, but it's spread through diffusion and acceptance in places like Europe and the United States, even here in California. There's a Buddhist monastery in our county, in case you weren't aware of that. So there's three major branches, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but here's a visual of it. The Mayahana is in the blue, and this is, they call it the big raft, as we'll see coming up. And it allows you to kind of blend other belief systems into it. Theravada is the small raft, and that's in Sri Lanka and the mainland of Southeast Asia, except for Vietnam. And this is the little raft. It's a much more strict form of Buddhism where you have the monks and the shaved heads and things like that. And the Vajrayana is in places like the Tibetan Plateau, Nepal, and Mongolia. This is the Dalai Lama's branch. So there's three different branches, just as we have different branches in Christianity, Islam, etc. So again, here's the basics. Mayahana is the big raft. Anybody can achieve enlightenment, and we'll go into more detail on that in a moment. It's non-exclusive, so it can blend, and it's more popular in places like Japan, where it blends with Shintoism, in China, where it can blend with Confucianism, which is more of an ideology, Vietnam, and the Western world, because it's called the big raft. Everybody can kind of join, and it's a little bit more open that way. Theravada is the little raft. Only monks, and they do have their form of nuns, can achieve enlightenment. And so what you do is everybody at some point in their life is supposed to be a monk. It could be for 1 week, or it could be for the rest of your life. And if it doesn't catch on to you, then you're just not ready to achieve enlightenment. So you just earn merit in this life, and then you'll be reincarnated in a future life, and then maybe you'll be ready to actually become a monk and achieve enlightenment. And you get merit through doing good deeds, giving out alms to the monks. There's all kinds of different things that you earn karma, or it's not really karma, but it's merit. And again, it's very intellectual and it's much more strict in terms of a monk lifestyle. And we see this in Sri Lanka, Thailand, Myanmar, Cambodia. For example, monks aren't allowed to actually grow crops or do anything like that. They're meant to meditate and help people. And so every day they go out with a bowl, and people earn merit by giving them food. At the same time, if you go to a monastery or a Buddhist, monastery, I'm not sure it's a monastery is the right one, but a Buddhist temple, it actually serves as a social um, life raft for most other people. So if you're homeless, you can go there and they will give you a place to sleep. If you have no food, you go there and they'll share the food that the community's given to them for you. So you don't see homeless shelters in Thailand, you see Buddhist temples. And then, as I mentioned, the Vajrayana, I might be mispronouncing it, is the Dalai Lama's branch in Tibet. So here are the different schools of Buddhism. We see the three main ones, and you guys are going to have to memorize all of the other ones for the next exam. That was meant as a bad joke. Just the three main schools of Buddhism. But if you go out, you can see how it branches out into different types of Buddhism. Here's Zen Buddhism over here. I like the Thai forest tradition. That's where they go live in the forest. And related to the environmental movement, people were concerned about deforestation. And so they went out and asked the Thai forest monks to get involved. So they went out and they actually, basically, what I forgot the term is, but they went out into the forest and they would put wrap ribbons around the trees, and they ordained them as monks. And that way nobody would cut down those trees. So here's some basic tenets. Again, hopefully I don't mess this up too much. But the main tenet of Buddhism is that everybody suffers. I think you guys are suffering through this lecture right now. Life is blissful. Bliss is everywhere. We just can't see it. So the Buddha, we'll get to him in a moment. His goal was to show the path to happiness, and that is it. How to end suffering. And he who sees me sees the teaching. He sees the teaching, sees me. Now, the Buddha, the original Buddha, is Siddhartha Gautama. He was a prince that was born 2,500 years ago on the India-Nepal border around 530 BC. And everyone said that he would either conquer the world, be a great warrior, or become an enlightened being. And his father wanted him to conquer the world. So he hid him from suffering so he would not become a holy man. And so he kept him in the palace. He never saw suffering. Everything was given to him. And then he hoped he'd become a great warrior. However, one day he sneaks outside the palace. And has four encounters that change him. One, he sees an old man. He never saw old people. So it signifies his change and that all age. Two, he sees someone that's sick, which he hadn't seen before. So just as everyone gets sick. Three, he sees a dead person, and that signifies that everyone will die. And then he sees a spiritual person trying to escape all three of these. And so his basic mission was how to resolve all of this suffering. And he went off and wandered all over and tried all types of different things, following different wise people or spiritual people, etc. And eventually he sat down and it came to him. And so here's the eightfold path. Know the truth, say nothing to hurt others, meditate, control your thoughts, resist evil, free your mind of evil, and work for the good of others and respect life. And so a lot of the things of Buddhism is trying to take suffering off of other people. So here's the top 10 countries with the highest proportion of Buddhists. And you can see Thailand comes in at first at 95% of people are considered Buddhist. Cambodia right next door is 90%. Myanmar next door, 88%. And then it kind of moves on. So just a few pictures for you. This is the Grand Palace in Bangkok. And you see a monk on the left-hand side wearing the robes, the shaved head, sandals. They get rid of all of their earthly possessions, basically, and their focus is on meditation. So this is the grand, like I said, palace where the king and others live. This is inside, and the things to know about Buddhism, as I mentioned, it blends other religious beliefs. So here are two demons, and we say demon, that sounds bad, but this is a traditional thing in traditional animistic Thai, pre-Buddhism, pre-Hinduism. These are traditional ones in their original religions. And I think there's 9 of them, and some are tricky, some are good, some are bad. It goes back and forth, but these two are protecting one of the temples in the Grand Palace. But then again, they're blending their original religions with Buddhism. On the left, we have, I believe it's Garuda. If you see that little guy on the left-hand side that's in red, and this is a half human, half bird, and it's a Hindu god. But it's been incorporated into the Buddhism that's practiced in Thailand. And on the right, you see all this gold and ornamentation. That also is much more Hindu. It's not really Buddhist per se, but again, they blended these things together. So all that ornaments and the gold is not really in with the asceticism of Buddhism, but it's blended together because of history. Even Angkor Wat, one of the great religious complexes in the world in Cambodia, originally was a Hindu temple and then became a Buddhist temple over time as they switched. Here's the reclining Buddha. It's really big. I couldn't get the feet in, so I had to turn around and take a picture of the feet. Encased in gold sheath. And the story with the reclining Buddha, this is where the Buddha went out and he got his alms, where people would give him food. And a lady gave him some food that he knew was spoiled and that would kill him if he ate it. But he didn't want to cause her any suffering. So he ate the food, laid down, reclined, and died. So the Buddha died. And he said that I'm just a man that found a way to enlightenment. I'm not a god. So kind of interesting because you always think it's like, hey, kick back and chill. But no, it was not. And again, there's the feet. Okay, so we're going to kind of stop at that point, and we'll come back in with economic geography and some other ones. But Buddhism is a very interesting religion, and it's interesting to look into. So we'll see you guys in a bit.